Yeah, so in general, I tend to teach you guys not to ask a lot of questions. Why is that? Why is that?
Value taking.
Exactly, because when you ask questions, inherently, oftentimes you're taking value. If I ask you, where are you from, what do you do, how old are you, I'm asking for you to provide the interesting parts of the conversation. I'm putting in almost no effort. I'm not giving my own input or insight. And you're having a boring conversation you've had 100 times with 100 different people. There's no value there, all right? So number one, so there's two levels on that. Number one, those are bad conversation topics. They're boring conversation topics. And then secondly, through the question format, I'm asking them in a boring way. I could make those better. Instead of saying, where are you from, be like, you don't seem like you're from New York. You just don't have that vibe. Where are you from? Because I've offered that little bit of value and insight, now it's a way more interesting question. All I did was I basically asked the same question. I just threw in a little wrinkle, right? Or instead of like, what do you do for a living? I'd be like, please tell me you don't work in an office in a cubicle. You're way too creative for that. I would be disappointed, right? If I say something like that, I've taken that same boring question. I still asked the question, but I asked it in a way more interesting way, right? The other version, and I call that's a soft form of answer the question instead of ask it. The other version of answer the question instead of ask it is give your answer. So instead of asking what you do for a living, I can tell you about what I do for a living and then let you follow suit if you would like. And once the conversation's kind of sparked, that can work very well also, right? So that's also offering value because I'm providing something unique. I'm providing something new along that process, right? So the question format itself isn't great, but then also the types of questions we tend to ask oftentimes are filler. Oftentimes we're asking questions because we don't know what else to say, and then it comes off as filler, it comes off as forced, it comes off like we're bored, right? But there are also good questions. There are also legitimately good questions. And in that book, Making People Talk, he actually encourages a lot of questions. He encourages, because he was a radio talk show host, he asked people questions for a living, right? But he would ask interesting, insightful questions, right? So if someone had an unusual job, instead of asking like, how long have you done that? Which is a fucking boring question. He'd say like, so I'm trying to imagine, 14-year-old you deciding to go down that career path, and I'm just wondering like, what was that moment where you decided that? What was the moment when you decided, Mommy, Daddy, I'm not going to be a doctor, I'm going to do this crazy thing instead, and how did they react to it, right? That's an interesting question, right? Because I'm actually putting myself in their shoes, I'm relating, and I'm offering some input into the question. Girls do not like it when guys talk to them just for sex because they get that a lot and they feel kind of used in that kind of a context. You know what else? Rich, successful guys don't like it when guys talk to them just because they're rich and successful. They want to feel like there's a genuine connection, genuine communication there, right? And then if that's the case, oftentimes they open up and then lo and behold, financial doors open for you, sexual doors open for you, those kinds of things, right? And so this idea, so conceptually, why is self-amusement a good idea? Is self-amusement a good idea because it's of value to the other person that you're having a good time? Not really. But what is being conveyed by you having a good time? It's conveying that you are liking the interaction. I'll come to other questions later. That you're liking the interaction for its own sake, and you're not there just to get an outcome. And that actually lowers people's defenses. It makes people trust you more, right? Ironically, telling a hot girl to fuck off at the start of the conversation might make her trust you more. Right? Instead, if you're showering her with compliments and being super nice and tiptoeing around and trying to please and impress her, that may make her distrust you because it seems like you have an agenda, right? So why is self-amusement good, right? Because self-amusement can be good to some extent, right? We've all had those times when you say some random thing is hilarious and it really works. But why does it work? It works for a few reasons. Number one, it works because you're saying something, right? Number one, if you are silent and not contributing to the conversation, nothing's gonna fucking happen. Right? And so some self-amused thing is way better than giving up and leaving, not saying anything, whatever. Secondly, when you are truly being self-amusing and we're saying things that intuitively don't seem like they would work, it seems like you don't have an agenda because, been saying that you might not. And now, ironically, if you learn this self-amused canned line works, now you are doing it to work, but it seems self-amused. And here's a really interesting thing about self-amusement. If you say a self-amused line and it works, and like, oh, that was really good, I'll use it more. And then you say it even better and it works even better. And then you're like, oh, that works, let me use it all the time. And now you start using it and not feeling it, you start using it in the wrong context, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. Right? And so the same line that was so brilliant, it stops working because the soul is lost. Because now you're delivering the line, but you're no longer actually self-amused, right? There's this concept, we call it yesterday's epiphany is tomorrow's crutch, right? And once it starts becoming a crutch, it no longer works because the self-amusement, the soul is lost. And now it actually comes off super agendaed. You deliver it weird. They're like, why did you say that? That was weird. What are you trying to get out of me from that? And so coming around to value, what is one big source of value you have? It's your own life experience. Right? Every single time, well, put it this way, every single instant of your life has been different than every single other person in here's life. Right? And every single time you had those different experiences, you also had different thoughts relating to those experiences. So within this room, we have thousands of years of experience that no one else in this room has ever had. Right? I don't know if it's actually literally thousands, but it's up there. Right? It's a lot. And when you're contributing that, when you're giving those unique insights that I'll never live, you're potentially offering value to me. But when you're asking me, where are you from? What do you do? How old are you? How did you get here? Those are really, really boring conversations. Right? So go out of your way to offer your own value. Go out of your way to offer your own perspectives. That's going to make you a far more interesting person in general, and that's going to be a form of value that you can provide. Okay? And why is self-amusement useful? Well, okay, let's go just through it. Because lack of agenda, right? If I'm telling a girl you and I would not get along, you and I all know that that's actually a line and can work somewhere. But in the real world, people think that means I don't want something from you. I'm not trying to hook up with you, because why would I say that if I were trying to hook up with you? And by the way, it's not even a self-amusing line, that's just a gamey line, right? But if a girl asks me what I do for a living and I give her some bullshit answer that happens to amuse me in that moment, it's breaking rapport. It's not trying to overtly form a connection, so it seems like it doesn't have an agenda. And actually in the moment, if it's working, if it has soul, it actually doesn't have an agenda in the moment other than the agenda of a fun conversation. Right? So that's a lot of times how self-amusement works. By the way, self-amusement is a very high bar, right? So a lot of guys that get this idea of self-amusement, they think they have to be crazy and quirky and, all over the place and stuff like that. You don't, okay? What I like to say instead of self-amusement is self-engagement, right? It's not like you have to be creative. You don't have to be a stand-up comic. You don't have to be a performer or anything like that. The bar I have is when I say this thing, is my brain shutting off? Am I going to sleep mentally in this conversation when I'm saying this thing? Right? If I'm not interested enough, if I'm becoming disinterested by what I'm saying, that's disengaging for me, and that's not cool, right? But it doesn't mean you have to be weird and quirky, right? It just means you have to be engaged and interested in your own conversation. And it doesn't mean you have to be high value. You can be self-amused and still be low value, right? So don't think that self-amusement means dancing monkey or performer or something like that, right? It just means I'm saying what I truly want to say. Sometimes what you want to say can be, that's a fucking boring topic, let's not talk about it. Right? If that's what you really feel and really believe, and that's what you would say to your best friend in that scenario, then you can say that as a self-amused thing.